Welcome, everybody. My name is Heather Perry. I'm the superintendent of schools here in Gorham, Maine. Here today to kick off a series of videos that we hope to produce for the community of Gorham, talking about our public schools and helping folks to understand a little bit about what's happening in our public schools today, how they might be different than they were maybe even 10, 20 years ago, and help people to see some of the really incredible things that are going on in our public schools as well. Great staff, great students, and the great programs that we offer. I have a series of 4 different themes that we're going to go through for this video series. Today we're going to start with theme number 1, which is helping to understand public schools in the 21st century and maybe how they're different today than they were 20 plus years ago. Then we also are going to have future themes around governance and decision making in public schools, finance in public schools and how schools are funded. And then we'll have another, our final clip will be on the future of public schools and what we see happening down the road. So welcome everybody to this video series. Through the series, we're going to have special guests coming in to talk with me around these various topics. And today, I have with us here today President Edmondson from the University of Southern Maine. I'm going to allow Jackie, if it's okay for me to call you Jackie, to introduce yourself and to the camera and tell folks a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So thank you so much for having me here. This is such a wonderful idea to have this series about public education. As Heather said, I'm Jackie Edmondson. I'm the 14th president of the University of Southern Maine. I've lived here in Gorham for just over about 1.5 years now. I love living in Gorham. I think it's a wonderful community, and I'm really excited to be part of it. And I'm looking forward to our conversation today. I'm a product of public education. I believe very much in the value of public ed, and I'm really excited about the conversation we're going to have.
Yeah, well, excellent. I'm also a product of public education, which is interesting. I'm not going to tell you the years that I was in public schools, just because I don't want to date myself, and I'm not going to force you to do that either.
Okay, that's a
but
deal.
I will say it's probably 20 plus years ago, so
Absolutely.
I'll give that hint anyway. Yeah. So, well, thank you for joining us. And again, really some questions that we might want to have around what are the differences between public schools today and what they were maybe 20 years ago, and some of the things that we're experiencing that maybe we didn't back then. And so I didn't know if you had any questions you want to start with, or do you want me to just...
Why don't you start, and then we'll just have a conversation. It'll be fun.
That sounds really good. So I think that one of the things that that folks always ask me when I'm going around and talking with folks about the public schools is, what do you teach in public schools? Is a question that a lot of people ask, and you might ask it for various reasons, but I think people are genuinely curious. Well, what is it that we teach students in public education? And I'm sure you get the question at USM, what do you teach students at university level? Yeah. I think my range is a little broader, though.
Yeah.
So, when we're thinking about public schools in general, I don't know about you at the post-secondary level, but at our level, I think so many things are the same and yet so very different.
Yeah, I think that's true. I do too. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, the ways that I see it in the public school system is that you have some of the very same topics that you've always had, and I'm sure you have some of the very same courses you've had at University of Southern Maine for many years, and so they're kind of foundational topics. We have reading, we have writing, we have math. Those are really foundational. We have social studies and science as well. But it's not necessarily the subject matter that's different significantly. It's really about sort of how we teach the subject matter. And I don't know, are you seeing anything, especially in your preparation programs for young teachers coming out of the University of Southern Maine, are you seeing anything that you're preparing teachers for differently?
Yeah, certainly. I think technology has influenced so much about what we're doing in terms of pedagogy and how we help people learn to become teachers. Yeah. And it's not just how to use a computer or like when I was in teacher education or when I was teaching K-12, was how to use the overhead projector. Those things have changed. Technology has certainly advanced. Yeah. But it's also, there are moral and ethical questions about uses of things like ChatGPT. There are ways in which we flip classrooms now so that there's much more engagement within the classroom and students can watch lectures outside of the classroom. I would imagine you're doing some of that in your K-12 school classrooms as well.
Yeah, we have a lot of the teachers that are utilizing the flipped classroom kind of setting. And I'll be honest with you, one of the things that the COVID-19 pandemic Not that I ever want to repeat that again,
Yeah.
but that's one of the things that it taught us very well, and it actually kind of forced many of our teachers to really think about that
Yeah.
pedagogy in terms of how to utilize technology in instruction. Was that flipped classroom experience where you're kind of doing a lot of independent reading and different things, and then you're practicing the materials together
Right.
as a class. One of the other things that I think about in terms of technology too is that prior to, and I think it was actually just the 1990s where the internet became really,
Yeah.
blew up and became very, very popular, because I can remember before the internet. Can you remember?
I
before?
can actually.
You can? All right. I actually remember the year that internet came, at least to my public school. I was a brand new teacher.
Yeah.
And actually Angus King was the governor at the time in Maine, and he had just started the MLTI. Which was his project that provided laptops to every 7th and 8th grade student in the state of Maine.
Yeah.
And I happened to be a 7th and 8th grade teacher at the time, very small school.
Yeah.
So these white books showed up on our desks and these laptops, and we were like, what do we do with them?
Yeah.
Like, it was amazing. And very quickly, one of the shifts that occurred is that it's so easy to find information online, whether you're using an AI system or whether you're using just now it's the old internet kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's so easy to find information and data and kind of the factual stuff. That really, I would say the biggest shift that's occurred in public education is that the focus isn't so much on facts and knowledge and being able to share that knowledge, because you can always find it. You can just pick your phone up. I've got my phone right here in my pocket. You can do that.
Yeah.
And you can Google pretty much anything and find that. It's really about how do you navigate the systems? How do you problem solve? How do you, have the skills for communicating those things? And how do you know that information is accurate or not accurate?
Yeah, that's a big part
well, that's
of
a
it.
huge one. I mean,
Yeah.
you must be seeing that a lot right now at the USM.
Absolutely. I mean, we do a lot with information literacy. I'm teaching a class right now on civic and community engagement, and just really helping to make sure the students they're taking up public issues, and they need to make sure they're using reliable sources of information, and that they're able to put together a concise argument that an elected official or a town council member or somebody would be able to hear their perspectives. The focus is really on local democracy and how you enact change when you live in a community.
Yeah, well, it was a great focus for sure. Yeah, at the public school level, when we think about that, it's really researching and understanding the difference between accurate information, actually also understanding bias and how bias plays a role in everything that everybody does. You can't not have bias because you're an individual, and really understanding that and how that plays out in research, how that plays out in factual, developing factual arguments, and kind of sharing your knowledge with others and how you communicate that. You mentioned also, I don't know if you said the word ethics or you said digital sort of, but it's the digital citizenry.
Right.
We have a lot of focus on that in our public schools because, again, these tools are incredible tools that our students and children have access to. I mean, that phone right there, what I just held in my hand, can you imagine 30 years ago?
No, I
people
can't.
thinking that?
I mean, I remember being in the library of my public elementary school, and the reliable source of information was the encyclopedia.
Yeah.
You just pull it off the shelf. You found what you were.
The smell of them.
I know. I loved them too.
I
I
miss
wanted.
that.
I know. Our students navigate such complicated worlds now, though, don't they?
Yeah.
And I do think public education has such a role to play in helping them to understand those differences and how to navigate the complexity.
Yeah. So it's not necessarily a knowledge-based system anymore. It's really more about skills and developing skills that allow you to kind of navigate that complex world that you're just talking about. And that starts very, very young. I mean, clearly students still need to read, right? I mean, students have to read.
Yeah.
That's not a question mark. So we absolutely still instruct in reading. We do the foundational pieces with phonemic awareness and fluency and all those things. That all is still happening in our schools. Students do still need to be able to, recognize their numbers, add them, some mental math, not as much maybe as in the past, but they have to have some solid foundation understanding of numbers and mathematics. And we still do that in our schools. And we still teach about our communities in social studies at the elementary level. Our students still go to the firehouse and they go to the police department and they visit the municipal center here, which I know is always an annual fun trip for the students and for the municipal folks to see the kids coming. So all that stuff still happens. It really is just, if you go into a classroom in a public school, I'm just thinking right now elementary level for now, I think the things that you would see that are different are you'd see access to iPads.
Yeah.
they're not, we have one-to-one access for students in Gorham, but they don't have them with them at all times, and we don't send them home because we do want to limit screen time. That's something that we pay attention to. But they have access to those materials at any time. And maybe you would see a carpet, you'd see a wonderful little rug where the kids would come and do different things. You would see probably different areas where they would have rotations of learning, where they would be collaborating in small groups and curiosity, trying to figure things out. And that's a lot of how they're learning at this point in time at that age. And so when you look at a classroom, you would see a lot of activity. You'd see, if you were to think, I think back to my own elementary years, and I remember fondly my second grade teacher. Do you have a favorite teacher?
Oh, I have a ton.
Oh, well, in just a minute I'm going to ask you about your favorite teacher and what that classroom was like, because I'm going to share mine right now. My second grade teacher was incredible. I loved her. But when I think about that classroom, it was rows of desks, it was chairs, it was textbooks, Basel readers. I remember those. I remember I was one of the kids that was always in for recess because my desk was messy. I always remember that. But I still loved her because she just was so caring and made me feel as though I was important, even when I had to stay in for recess. And that relationship, no different. Like we see that in our schools still today. That relationship is still the foundational piece. But what you see in a classroom might be different. So who was your favorite teacher?
Well, I can tell you every teacher I had in elementary school.
Every teacher?
Every teacher.
Well, so you like
Kindergarten was Miss Martin. First grade was Mrs. Coleman. My second grade teacher was Mrs. Updike. And I was thinking about her over the weekend because I bought a book called Birds of Maine. And Mrs. Updike was the one who had us create bird books when I was in second grade, and that started a lifelong interest of mine in birds. And I do think that's one of the things that I love about public education is the teachers are fabulous. And I learned things from them that I still am engaged with today. Mrs. Lar was my third grade teacher. She had hair so long she could sit on it. And she was the one who introduced me to Little House on the Prairie books. And I mean, it was just an interesting, I loved that time of my life and all that I could learn when I was in school. It was just it was fun.
Yeah, definitely. Your bird piece reminded me, I was doing an observation yesterday at one of our elementary schools. And this was a library media specialist, so it was not a traditional classroom, but it was a library media. And she did a read aloud with second graders. It seems to be a theme with second graders for whatever reason. But it was about the chickadee.
Okay.
And you talk about learning at your age, when you were younger. Well, I was listening into this read aloud with second graders, and I learned all kinds of things too. I was thoroughly engaged in the read aloud, learning about chickadees. And there was one piece where the kids were very wowed that a chickadee had like 100 different places where they hid food.
Oh, wow.
And
I didn't know that.
And they recognize all of them, like they can remember all of them.
Oh, wow.
And they were all trying to think if they could remember where they put their toothbrush and things like that. So it was really...
That must have been fun.
It was a fun and engaging conversation. And again, those are some of the things that I don't think have changed over the years.
They haven't, but I do think teachers today are dealing with, again, back to that theme of complexity, what they have to navigate these days with student mental health issues and the opioid crisis, and then just staying abreast of technology. I mean, I have such respect for K-12 teachers. It's just remarkable what they do, and they change lives for the better in so many ways.
Yeah, they do. I do think that's something that is a little different, but maybe it's just because when I remember my own experiences in second or third grade, I was a kid, so life was simpler, right? Today, things do seem quite complex for public schools, and I think dealing with things like mental health, having worked through a pandemic, attendance and truancy kinds of issues, working with specialized populations in ways that we've never worked with specialized populations before. Whether they be special education, like maybe your high needs, autism, or behavior or functional life skills students, or whether it be students that maybe just need some help with medical needs. I mean, we have students in our schools today that we have to monitor their diabetic blood levels, and our nurses are actually having to monitor that and help students learn how to regulate their own bodies. We have situations where we have students in our schools today that are nonverbal, and they can't communicate, as we would typically communicate. Yet they're just as bright and intelligent and curious little beings as anybody else. But can you imagine the frustration of trying to be in a school and not being able to communicate and having to work with students in that area? We have students that have feeding tubes. We also have the most brilliant students that can do pretty much anything you ask them to do, and all of the things that range in between. And that's part of the beauty of public schools too.
Yeah.
Just the range that we work with of families and students.
Yeah, you can't turn people away. I mean, that's what I love about public ed. You welcome everyone, and you bring them in, and you do the very best you can for them, given what their goals are and what we can accomplish. And I think that's one of the frustrations I often have is when people criticize public schools or public teachers, I don't think they really fully understand everything that goes on in the course of a day for a public school teacher, and that common misperception that they're off evenings, weekends, summers is so just so misplaced and so wrong. I mean, they're working really hard all the time, and it's just remarkable.
Yeah, they do. I mean, I think that I get a chance to see from my perspective. I remember what it was like to be a teacher.
Yeah.
And I remember the grading of papers every evening, and I remember the weekend lesson planning and basically dragging my daughter down to my classroom when she was a toddler, and she'd go play in the corner and with crayons and markers while I was lesson planning for the next week, And that's a pretty typical schedule for our teachers. And then many teachers have their own families, as I did, that they're trying to juggle as well. And it's not an easy task, but it is something. There's not many professions that still exist today, I don't think, that are what I would describe as a true calling. Like you're not doing it for money or status or anything like that. It's the calling. It's the impact that you have on children and their families, and the positive impact that you can make. And teachers today are no different than they were probably 20, 30 years ago. That's another thing that's very much the same.
I completely agree with you. I think that middle school teachers in particular have a very special calling.
Now, why would you say that about middle school students?
No, about the teachers.
Oh, the teachers.
The teachers have a very special calling to be a middle school teacher.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, they do. And one of the things too that I think is a little different for public schools today than maybe they were 20 to 30 years ago is that, I think, especially here in the state of Maine, we're seeing different students. And this is good. This is not a bad thing. We're seeing different students than we have in the past, I came from the Machias area of Maine, and I have to be honest with you that I didn't know the global world very well until I did get to college, and then got to experience some different cultures and different languages and different places that people were from. I did know Canada because that was like 40 minutes from my home, but I wouldn't say that's hugely different. But here in the community of Gorham, we have 28 different languages that are spoken in our schools, and I don't know if people realize that or not.
That's fabulous, though, isn't it?
It is awesome, the diversity that we're beginning to experience here in our community, and just the wealth of knowledge that brings to our community that otherwise wouldn't be there. But it also has its own set of challenges as well. We have students in our classrooms that do not speak English, and yet, we're responsible to ensure that they have a high quality public education. And we do it, and we do a darn good job of it. But I don't think, at least in my experiences in Maine, is something that maybe was as present 20 years ago than it is now. So that's a big difference. Are you seeing that diversity you are at USM?
We are.
Talk to me a little bit about what maybe some of the things that you guys are doing with that diverse population and helping to make sure that they're kind of woven into the fabric of the school in a positive way.
Yeah, I mean, I think really the goal is to make sure there's a great sense of belonging for everybody who's at the university, so they can thrive and they can learn and do their very best work. And in some cases there are some language challenges that students have, so we have services available to them for language services, and just learning in general. And when you've come from, some of our students who are coming from immigrant populations, or they come because there was a lot of trouble where they were before, right? Sure. And so there's that added mental health issue that can come along if they've had experienced a lot of trauma, if they've come from a war zone or war-torn area.
Yeah.
And so that's the other piece for us, is just making sure that they have counseling and the support that's needed.
Yeah, and you're working with that at the sort of the young adult level,
Yeah.
And we see that as a whole family. I mean, we have students coming in our kindergarten classrooms or our second grade or third grade classrooms, again, not speaking English, and the way that we have to work with them is not just the individual student, but the entire family, because that really is something that that's how we have to approach it in order to get to the individual needs of the student. Is through the family.
Sure. Yeah, and I do think that is something that's quite different for K-12, is that you are this community hub in so many ways. I mean, I like to think of us as a community hub, but it's a different kind of hub, right? In terms of activities and events and outreach to the public and public education, but we're not serving the whole family in the same way that you are, right?
Yeah, and that's definitely something that public schools try to pay attention to, is that whole family approach, the whole child approach, and really thinking about that. It's not really, we talk about the fact that yes, math, English, writing, all those things still are taught in our schools,
right.
But it's not the original 3 R's.
Right.
The reading, writing, and arithmetic, and that was all that we had in public schools. Today, I like to talk about the 3 R's, being rigor, relevance, and relationships.
Wow.
And that really is about that larger group and thinking about the whole child and not just because again, you go back to the knowledge industry. It's no longer about being able to regurgitate information or find information, because that's easy. You can just Google it. It's really about those relationships, really about that problem solving, really about that communication piece. And so we have to start really young with that type of thing.
Yeah.
The other thing, I don't know, you probably don't experience this as much at the post-secondary level, but maybe you do actually. I'd be curious to hear about this. Okay. One of the other things that we're dealing with in the public schools today is homeless students.
Oh, yeah.
Do you deal with that?
Absolutely.
Oh, that'd be interesting. So we have seen our homeless population increase. Now, when we look at some of our neighbors with different socioeconomic statuses and different, demographics, it might be different for each school, but we've seen an uptick, certainly in Gorham, of working with students and families that experience homelessness, which is a really scary thing.
Yeah.
And there's laws there now that maybe weren't there before, and I'm happy that they're there. They need to be. Yeah. But like the McKinney-Vento Act, for example, is a federal statute that really requires schools to deal with homeless students differently than a typical student. Because in a public school setting, I don't know if you know this or not, but everything is based on residency. So if you live in a town, you go to that school, that town offers a school, you go to that school. If you don't live in that town, then you're not going to that school, you're going to the other town school. So much is residency based. For a homeless student or a homeless family, that residency piece goes away. Like it's hard you don't want to move students to a different school every time they might move in a homeless situation.
Right.
So that's something that we are dealing with significantly. It requires us many times, let's say, for example, a student becomes homeless, they're in the Gorham schools, they become homeless, and they're now in Portland. Well, it becomes our responsibility as a Gorham public school to transport that student from Portland to Gorham.
Wow.
So that they can continue their education and not be disrupted in their educational environment due to their homelessness. So when I say the laws and how we deal with things differently, that's a significant difference.
Yeah.
And now that's in the best interest of the child. It really works very well, and that's what's supposed to happen. But there are costs involved with that as well.
That's right.
And it requires us to kind of to look at that piece. So I don't know, what are the things that you're having to deal with for homeless students at the post?
Well, we certainly don't have that complication of them changing schools. So it really is about making sure they find a place to live, that they have the supports they need. There's so much food insecurity right now as well.
And
so, we have food pantry, making sure that they can access food when they need it. And so those are all challenges. But, the homeless situation in K-12, it's significantly different. And I remember I used to supervise student teachers when I was a faculty member in Minnesota. And I remember teachers talking about children sleeping in their classroom. And they would say that they allowed them to sleep in their classroom because the classroom may be the only safe place where the child can fall asleep because of the situation they've had at home. So again, I think teachers and public schools are dealing with these really complicated social issues that from the outside, you may not realize, but for those teachers, it was a big deal to make sure that a child could sleep if they needed to sleep, right?
Yeah. And we see that in the Gorham Public Schools. It may be something dealing with homelessness, but it also may be that, the pet passed away the night before and they couldn't sleep, and all of that stuff.
Right.
It's just, again, when I think of our public schools, I think of just wrapping our arms around every child individually and doing whatever we need to do to support them and making sure that they feel welcome and safe when they come to our schools.
I would say I feel the same way about the university level too, just really making sure every student feels safe, everyone can do their very best work. So that part doesn't change.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah, that doesn't change at all. Well, let's see here. I wonder about, So I wonder, when I go to the university, I wonder about how are your classrooms different? Like the actual structure of the classrooms. How are they different today, do you think, than they might have been 20 to 30 years ago at the university level? Like, what are the things that you're doing? Maybe not just the structures, but the things that you're doing differently with your students.
Well, I think this may go back to what we were talking about earlier with technology. And I think even after the pandemic, what we're finding is that sometimes there are classes where students are meeting in person, but there may be some students on Zoom because they can't come to class for one reason or another. So I think faculty have really learned to navigate that in-person and off campus kind of situation as needed. Certainly the technology in our rooms is really different than it used to be. Cameras and screens and students bring, one of the things I think that has surprised me since I started to teach again, I used to teach all the time, and then during the pandemic I couldn't teach because I was an administrator and I had
Plenty
a lot,
on your plate at that point.
a lot going on. So when I went back to the classroom this fall, I think one of the things that surprised me is how much students do through their phones.
Oh yeah.
Homework assignments, and they write beautiful essays, and it's all in their phone. And I mean, it's amazing how that happens
Do you do the thumbs when you're typing on your phone?
I do. Well, I do both. Yeah, it depends on what I'm doing. But but I'm told that the younger generation only uses their thumbs.
Yeah. It's something that my daughter taught me when she was growing up as a teenager. It's pretty much the only way that we communicated when she was a teenager was through text. So I definitely learned the whole thumb thing, and I can do that myself pretty thoroughly. So I'm just thinking of myself, as an older woman now, doing my job, and the things that I do on my phone now, never would have been able to do. It's just amazing the things that can be done on that device.
Yeah.
And we provide in the public schools here. We have one-to-one devices all the way across the board.
That's amazing.
Now, again, as I said earlier, our K-5, we try to limit the screen time, and we don't send them home. When you get to the 6th grade, we do start. They become like a textbook.
Yeah.
So our students actually they take their iPads, they take them home, they travel back and forth with them. They're responsible for powering them up and charging them and keeping them maintained and all those things. And our kids do a great job with that. They have really great responsibility with that. Our high school students each have iPads as well. And when I think about the technology and what we offer, the thing that's really most important to me, though, is the conversation around appropriate utilization of it. It's not just, here are these incredible tools, and now you need to just spend all your time on them. I mean, I think we've, as a whole culture in the United States, I think we've sort of backtracked and said, maybe we need to back off the screen time. We need to back off a little bit of this and have some interpersonal skills as well. And so we do that in our schools. And I think we have the social aspects of schools. I don't know if you remember your middle school days, but mine, I remember, was all about the lunchroom.
Yes.
Yeah. Did you remember, was the lunchroom the thing for you too?
It was, yeah.
Because it was, who are you sitting with at the cafeteria table? What were you going to talk to your friends about that you couldn't talk to them about before?
Yeah.
And when we think about how schools are the same or how they're different, that's the same. That piece is absolutely the same. The social aspects and the peer interactions are very much still there. But that technology piece is huge, and so the appropriate use of technology is really, really big.
Yeah, and balancing that, as you do, with making sure that students talk with one another and that they sit, around tables and solve problems together.
Do you have phone hotels? No,
I
probably
don't
not.
think so.
Okay.
Phone charging stations?
No, we have what's called phone hotels at the high school.
Okay.
For those of you that may not know this is important information. So we want our students to be able to have their phones, right? But we also want them to not use them when they shouldn't be using them.
I got you.
And so what we have is these pockets, these great big, they're called phone hotels. The kids love them. They're called phone hotels. And the kids, when they come in the classroom, they take their phone out of their pocket, they put it in the phone hotel, and then they sit down.
Oh, that's
And
great.
it stays in that pocket until they leave for the next class.
Yeah.
And so it really forces that engagement. When you're talking
Yeah.
about the engagement piece, that's what made me think about the phone hotel. So
Yeah, and I think students, I don't know what you're finding, but I've tried to go out and visit high schools in the area and listen to young people talk about what their experiences have been in high school and what they're expecting to do after high school. And one of the things that I hear them talk about from time to time is just sort of the anxiety of being around other people. And I think so much of their interactions can be through text messages or phones or social media. And, so just I think it's so important to help them feel comfortable
yeah.
talking with one another. And I don't know if that's an impact of the pandemic or if it's the use of technology and social media or some combination of those.
Yeah.
But I don't know if you're seeing that too.
Yeah, we definitely see that, and I think that in schools, again, we do that really, I think, a very good job around the social interactions, the peer interactions. A lot of the work that we do in the classroom setting is collaborative work.
Yeah.
They're not necessarily sitting individually. And, I think if you think of the traditional classroom, at least the classroom I remember in high school for history class, for example, you'd sit there, the teacher would be talking, and you'd be writing those notes, and you'd be preparing for that quiz or that test. It's not, we still have assessments, don't get me wrong.
Right.
We still know what our students, and we force our students to sort of demonstrate their knowledge in various ways. But that kind of setting is not necessarily, you see some of it, but you don't see it a lot in our classrooms. It's more about, projects and collaborative work and pairing together and kind of, I don't know if it's forcing that or if it's just, that's one of the skills that we feel strongly that students need when they graduate from our schools to be successful, either post-secondary or in careers or whatever they choose to do. And I think that's the other thing, too, that as a public school system, we're preparing students for all of those options.
You are.
Whether it's post-secondary, direct into career, or whatever else.
Yeah.
We want our kids to be successful regardless of what they choose to do once they graduate. And so we have to provide that sort of broad skill base for them to be able to draw from in those various experiences. And that's something I think is maybe it's different now than 20 years ago, but I think it's maybe the same as it was 50 years ago, which is such an emphasis now in this public schools around getting students out into like job experiences or job shadowing or internships, apprenticeships, those kinds of things. We're really focused on that right now because I think I think we went through such a long period of time in public schools thinking, okay, you have to go to college, you have to go to college, you have to go to college. And that's not necessarily the case. Not that we don't love University of Southern Maine, because we do. And it is the right thing for many, many students.
That's right, but it isn't for everyone.
It's not for everybody.
Right.
And so we've really kind of broadened that focus, saying that kind of experience is good for any student that wants to be successful, whether they're going to college or whether they're going directly to a career.
Yeah, I think you do an amazing job. I've learned about that since I've been here. I mean, with JMG and so many other places where you have students out in the community, and that's definitely a change from when I was in school or even when I was working with student teachers in public schools. I mean, it's a trend that I think is an interesting one.
Yeah, really trying to embed those aspirations and their thought processes about their future stories in what we do in the regular classroom.
And it's true. And if I go back to when I've been listening to high school students talk over the past couple of months, one of the other things I hear them say pretty consistently is that they aren't sure they're prepared for the next step. And so you're making sure they do feel prepared. You're giving them that confidence.
That's right.
And I do find myself telling them things like, you went to high school during one of the most difficult times we could imagine. You had such disrupted high school experiences, so many disappointments with games or concerts being canceled, graduations. I feel like they're so much better prepared than I was when I was 17 for what was next. But I think that maybe they just need to hear that. But I agree. I think the work that you're doing to get students out into the community really makes a difference.
Yeah. Well, and I would say too, when we're thinking about the public schools and preparation and programs, how we sort of organize our schools has changed a little bit too. I think that it used to be maybe 20 plus years ago, at least from my experiences in public schools, that your classroom teacher was your classroom teacher was your classroom teacher at the elementary level.
Yeah.
Not so much anymore. I mean, students they work as teams at the elementary level. Students can sometimes work with other teachers in those teams. They're collaborating way more than it used to be when I was a young teacher. I remember it was kind of the doors closed and you're on your own. And that's not the way it is anymore at that levels, at all levels actually. And then at the middle school level, they're organized in not grade levels, but in teams. So sixth grade has 4 teams, seventh grade has 4 teams, eighth grade it has 4 teams, and they're actual teams. So like they have names. You know, they love the names, and they'll rotate between their core coursework within those teams, and so it really forms a close, familiar relationship, and tries to keep that close classroom, but a little bit broader, and gives them a little more freedom. And then of course, as they go into high school, then it's just whew, you got all those choices and all those things that they can do at that point in time. It's really good.
Yeah, I think the other thing that's a little bit different too is my oldest son is a mental health counselor, and he has worked in elementary schools, and he's actually in classrooms with students who are his clients. I'm not exactly sure what he calls them. So that's been interesting for me to learn from his perspective too, how he's experiencing being part of a classroom, working with classroom teachers, working with paraprofessionals, and trying to make sure that students can make it through the day successfully.
Well, you talk about those mental health needs, and they're all the way from kindergarten all the way through 12th grade. And I mean, I remember, again, when I was in school, I don't remember hardly ever seeing a social worker or anybody like that in my public school setting. I remember guidance counselors at high school, but that was all about college. It had nothing to do with supporting my social and emotional well-being. It's not the case anymore. We have a lot of services that we provide to our students and families that are necessary now in today's world. I think that schools have become the place for those services to be provided. You know, as we lose some of those community-based services and other things due to whatever reason, people I think have really leaned on the schools to provide those services. And so in the Gorham schools, for example, we have at the elementary level, we have 1 social worker and a full-time guidance counselor at each school, and we offer a rotation in our allied arts rotation that's all social skills, social emotional learning for K through 2 students. And so that's at elementary level. At our middle school and high school, at the middle school, we have 2 guidance counselors, 2 social workers, one of which is a drug and alcohol counselor specifically, and for those kinds of supports structures as well. And they're really there to help those students sort of navigate the complex world that they're navigating right now. I mean, to be a teenager in today's world is not the same as it was when I was a teenager. I'm sure when you were a teenager.
Very different.
Because I used to be able to turn things off. If I didn't like something that happened in my school day, I just got home and it wasn't there anymore. Well, I mean, good, bad, or indifferent. You can look at the phone in good ways, but you can also look at the phone in bad ways. Kids can't turn that off any longer.
I know.
And so that's really complex for our students to navigate. Then at the high school level, we have 3 different social workers plus a drug and alcohol counselor, and then we have 3 guidance counselors as well. So a lot of work going on there. For support of students, and so you can kind of see that need growing, and in response to that, you have to increase the staffing and support.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I don't know. Have we wandered through a lot of the differences? I mean, I think again, if I were to sum it all up, and maybe I'll ask you in just a moment if you could sum it up in your mind too, what you've heard and what you've thought about today for the differences between public schools today and maybe what they were 20 or plus years ago. I think. It has to do with the different type of instruction, not the content. Content is very similar, but the different type of instruction that's focused more on skills, more on problem solving, those kinds of things, and communication and collaboration. B, I think the mental health needs, social emotional support needs are significantly larger than they were 20 plus years ago. And I would also say that, you know, when we think about some of the other support systems like special education or 504 or homeless liaison or multilingual learners, all of those things are kind of new and added on top of the work that we do too. And I think I'd sum it all up with just saying the complexity is just greater. It's not necessarily, you know, you still have 20 students in a classroom and a teacher at the elementary level, but what we're asking them to do is different.
Yeah, it's really tough. The complexity is there, and but at the same time, as we said before, one of the beauties of public education is you welcome everyone, and you do the very best you can for everyone. So
So those relationships remain constant.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, thank you for your time and your willingness to chat.
This was a lot of fun.
Oh, good.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. And you know, again, public education is such a pillar of our society and so important to our democracy. And thank you for the great work that you're doing here in Gorham. I'm proud to be a member of this community.
Thank you, Jackie. And I think that the investments that we make here in Gorham in our public schools really help broaden the horizons for all of our students and
Yeah.
community members. And I'm glad that many of them actually choose to go to USM
Yes.
as an option as well, and we see their success moving
Yeah.
forward through that lens as well. So thank you so much for your time.